This
Cuevila.
conference will now be recorded.
Okay. And in
Okay.
English this time.
I open the Committee for Citizen Involvement meeting. We have Commissioner Cuevila, Commissioner Sherwood, Commissioner Landon, and Commissioner McGinley. So, Mike, the only thing that was discussed were rules about quorum, and Christine was doing some research, and so you didn't miss anything of substance. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? Hearing none. The first item we have, I believe, is minutes approval. So we have the March 17, 2020 CCI meeting and the March 17th. No, looks like that's the same date twice. No, it says November and March. I just read March twice. Sorry.
Yeah, they're both on the 17th.
Okay. So any input from commissioners on minutes approval?
Great minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Koivula.
Well, if Mike thinks they're good.
I've reached the gold standard with Commissioner Koivula. Thank you very much.
Okay, so roll call for approval of minutes. Chair Sherwood in favor. Commissioner Cuevila.
Aye.
Commissioner Landon.
Aye.
Commissioner McGinley.
Aye.
All right, minutes are approved. Now we have business from the audience. I'm assuming there's no business from the audience. And then we have.
Sorry.
Sandy, yeah.
Sorry about that.
No worries. So now we have Wetland and Riparian Inventories with Monica.
Good evening, commissioners. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint slides, so we're going to have a more interactive discussion. So give me a moment, please. Okay. And I'm going to have my camera off just during this, but I will have it on when we go through questions and discussion. So I thought we could focus. For the record, I'm Monica Sather, Senior Planner with the Community Development Division. As noted, this issue before you will consider proposed revisions to the Community Engagement Plan for the Wetland and Riparian Inventories in our Urban Growth Boundary, or UGB, expansion areas. We will be looking for a vote on whether to approve the revisions. This will actually be a two-part issue. After the vote, I will share some specific activities related to one section of the plan where changes are shown. The engagement plan recently went before this committee this year when you approved the original plan on April 21st. And since then, some factors have influenced the project, namely due to COVID-19, which created the need for us to adjust the project. The project team gave the original engagement plan another look to see what should be revised to reflect the changes to the project. So here we are this evening. And my clicker isn't responding very well, so let me try another way here. There we go. So jumping right in, the main driver of the revisions was due to the budget cuts at the state that occurred over the summer, which affected the project, and it affected a lot of projects that received technical assistance grants throughout the state from the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development. So we're not the only one. Only a portion of the grant funds was removed from Springfield's award, so we will still have some support from the state. The cuts to our project had the effect of removing tasks 4 and 5 from the list of accomplishments required to fulfill the terms of the grant agreement. Task 4 included the staff report, and task 5 would have resulted in the adopted ordinances that update the inventories and amend the Springfield Natural Resources Study. These tasks are, they're still part of the project, which is why they're still identified in the engagement plan. And the engagement strategies for them remain really unaffected by the revisions before you this evening. So it's just the timeline change. Here's a big picture look at where we were at before showing specific tasks that changed on the timeline. These stages really build on each other in sequence. So while we're in the early stages of all that will need to be done to complete the project, we're in a moment that involves the most detailed review of the results based on data collected in the field, and it involves the most subtasks. The information that will come from this step will serve as an important basis for the end products like the staff report. So looking at the specific tasks that changed and are shown in your packets, I'm hovering over where we're at now, and we're about ready to share the draft with the public. And then the tasks that changed I'm hovering over are task 4. I can't see my mouse very well. Task 4 here and task 5. So this gives us a specific idea. We have the draft report from the consultants, and we're coordinating with them to gear up for sharing the inventory results as soon as the first part of January. The proposed timeline revisions add a few months to task 3, so that has changed as well, where we'll explore policy options. And it moves tasks 4 and 5, which I pointed to earlier, a bit later, about a season later. So it bumped back a quarter. And we're also making clear that these are estimated timeframes for the tasks shown in the engagement plan. And with adoption not being tied to the terms of the grant agreement, we can ensure discussions will progress as needed at critical decision points, such as the preferred policy approaches. And we can be even more confident that adequate attention will be given to the adoption process. The next type of proposed amendment to the engagement plan drills down to the point we're at in the project now. So in April, we were uncertain about where we would be this winter when we adopted the original engagement plan. The original plan identified a contingency item actually to address ways for stakeholders to engage that were not in person, just in case we couldn't hold an open house or similar event. So we didn't technically need to amend the plan given the approach to insert a contingency ahead of time. But since we already identified other needed changes, it made sense to modify this task to be clear that we are indeed proceeding with other tools, which will primarily be online and will be supplemented with other ways to connect with the project team. I'm excited to share more about this later. And lastly, the needed amendment in response to the state budget cut also gave us an opportunity to button other things up with the fresh look, such as an update on where the project is currently at in the inventory process and who is actually doing the inventory after the city selected environmental consultants as the scientific experts on the project. And that's shown on page 1 of the document, and in your packets, it would be page 8. So before we shift the discussion to highlight some of the tools that the project team will use to share the draft results of the inventory with stakeholders this winter, targeted for January, I want to pause and focus on the action related to the actual amendments as presented in the community engagement plan. And to summarize, the changes address the DLCD budget reduction in the modified timeline. They formalize that we're proceeding with other forms of engagement, which are primarily virtual, and reflect the current status of the project on page 1. So with that, staff requests a vote on the amendments, and I can pull up specific pages in the packet if useful and take any questions the committee has at this time.
Do any committee members have questions or discussion?
I have one question.
Yeah.
Was wondering how the outreach to stakeholders, including environmental groups, is going. Has there been much input back and forth between groups like Audubon and the Sierra Club Many Rivers group?
That's a great question. The two that you just mentioned have not responded. We did do targeted email outreach and had the news release and an e-update go out. I haven't had a chance to check our subscribers as of today on the email e-update list, but who we have heard from so far, Mackenzie River Trust has been really responsive and great to talk to, and then a couple of our watershed councils as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is Commissioner McGinley. I just wanted to say great job. I know that this year has presented a lot of obstacles, both with funding and with ways that we can do public engagement in an effective way. And I just commend you all for adjusting so quickly and still keeping the project on track.
Thank you. And while I will say City of Eugene has been a great example. We're hearing from Willamette what they're able to do as partners. So I think what you'll see later on really is parallel to what Eugene's really great example was. So I appreciate that feedback.
Any more questions or discussion before vote? Okay, so does somebody want to make a motion?
I move to approve as presented.
I second that motion. Motion to approve as presented by Commissioner McGinley, second by Commissioner Sherwood. So by roll call, Commissioner Sherwood, aye. Commissioner Cuevla?
Commissioner Cuevla, you're muted, so we didn't hear you.
Aye.
Commissioner Landon?
Aye.
Commissioner McGinley?
Aye.
All right, that's 4 in favor, none opposed to approve as presented. Thank you, Monica. Really appreciate the work. And now, Monica, are you gonna go on to part 2?
Yes.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for the feedback. So this is the more engaging part of it. Still brief, but I'm excited about it. Okay, moving to the next slide. There's a little bit of a lag here. Okay, so taking us back to the other formats I mentioned for sharing the draft results of the inventory with interested parties and stakeholders and more in task 2, we're looking to do this next round of engagement in January to allow for review and comment for 3 weeks. So we're still dialing in a date, but leaving that window open for almost a month in this environment is important to us. We had a virtual meeting with property owners in the study area this spring before the consultants began their work. And the focus of this round coming up is to make sure we submit a draft report to another state agency, Department of State Lands, for its review. And we want to make sure that the report correctly represents the firsthand knowledge of property owners in the study area, also knowledge of stakeholders, anyone else who is interested, and that includes agency partners and knowledge of the city to support the report's findings. To get stakeholders' review and responses in a setting that does not allow for face-to-face interaction and immediate feedback allowed us to get creative on how to let people know the results are ready. And it also allowed us to get creative on how their ability to let us know what they think could be done, just wanting to make sure it's convenient and really wanting to get good responses, or as best we can. So with that, the project webpage emerged as a clear option to provide a one-stop location for people. On that page, we will share a full PDF report to give everyone access to the actual version as prepared by the consultants. But that report is a lot to digest. It looks like about 450 pages from the draft I've seen. So even if you know what to look for, there's just a lot there. And to make the information clearer and easier to access for people, and to invite input in an engaging way, we're developing a couple tools. So the project team is creating a story map, and I'll touch on that more in a second. And we're also creating a survey because we thought about what someone might expect to see if they walked in a room for an in-person open house. For example, someone might expect to see information stations around the room with maps and a way to document their comments somehow. So the story map, it's like a map, but it kind of takes you through why someone is doing a project, and it's a presentation in a way. That takes the PDF pages of the map and the report, and it brings maps to life. There will also be content in there that explains more about how and why the results are shown the way they are. With Story Map, you can zoom into a wetland mapped in a specific study area, for example. Someone can interact with the map by clicking around the screen to explore what the results mean. And realizing many people will come to this with interest in how certain properties are affected, they can also search for specific places, like entering a specific address. So I'd like to give you a preview and show what that looks like in practice. We are still in draft form. We're getting our colors dialed in and some of the navigation, but we have a draft. So this is what the homepage would look like, and I won't scroll through it all, but someone could navigate by just going up and down all the way through. We thought, again, even though this filters down a lot of the report, it's still long. So we thought someone might be interested in only certain pieces of the story. For example, someone could go, okay, I just want the results. That's all I care about. And how is my property affected? So they could click onto this what did we find bar. I'm going to scroll a little bit more, but that bar you see stays right at the top. So I'm going to head there now, and it takes you right there. And images we're finding still are taking a little time to load, but now that would bring you into all of the UGB expansion areas if you just wanted to see all of them and what was affected. Someone might just say, I want to see what's going on in the Gateway study area, the North Gateway. So someone could click on this button and it would take you right to it, and that's what I will do. Or someone could actually just click on the blue areas or the areas highlighted in red if you're having trouble with blue, and zoom right into it. But I'm going to click on North Gateway, and it takes you right there. So kind of trying to get at what might be on an easel, for example, on a board in a room. And then you'll see some plots and different blobs. I can even zoom in if that's a little hard to see. And we're working on clicking on the actual mapped feature, and someone might say, I'm still curious about it. I want to see more about it. And we have instructions along the left side, so others interested and who might not really be used to this kind of format know how to get to this kind of viewing platform. And then the other cool feature is, again, I mentioned an address. So if someone in the study area who has a house or a business has an address for their property, it's easily entered. Clearwater Park is an example that comes to mind that is in our Millrace study area. And so now I'm seeing Clearwater Park pop up. Click on that and it takes me right there. So that's just a sample of the story map. We really wanted to introduce the project and be able to get people to where else they might want to lead after looking at the story map. So I have more on that, and I'll go back to the screen with the PowerPoint slides. And I'll go through this and then take any questions, and I can go right back to the screen with the story map if you'd like. So at the end of that story map, if I scrolled all the way to the bottom, you would see a direct link to the survey. So we can keep momentum and not lose interest, because really we would like to hear what people think and get comments. So instead of forcing someone to go back to the project webpage, that button is right there that someone could click on after looking at the story map to give us comments. And in case someone wants to go right to the survey, it will also be its own button on the project webpage. And within the survey itself, that will contain map images on the screen to help people visualize before entering responses. So someone could do just the survey and still have a chance to see the map. And again, that survey will be open for 3 weeks. So these tools and the project webpage itself will also emphasize that reviewers can contact staff at any time. We're trying to make time available and block things out for people to contact us. So that's a really important point I wanted to say as well. It's not just a one way, like we're here to help. We'll also be sending out letters to property owners in the study area who we've been working with. And then thinking about the engagement plan we talked about in April, letters will go out to properties within 300 feet of the study area. And we found that that will include Springfield properties, properties in Lane County's jurisdiction, and even some Eugene owners and occupants. Comments from the property owners in the study area, though, will be most important to Oregon Department of State Lands, who will be reviewing the inventory report and will be approving the wetlands portion of the inventory. So the letters for the property owners in the study area, we're going to go a little bit further with the information we will include for them. We are going to print out the mapped results specific to their property, and they will have 2 copies of that. One will be for their records, and the other one we're inviting them to write on and put comments on and send back to us with prepaid postage if they prefer to provide comments that way instead of doing the online survey. And before finalizing their comments, property owners or anybody, but we're emphasizing this for the property owners in the study area, they can request a virtual meeting, not just with staff, but the environmental consultants and scientists to learn more and ask questions about the results. So that way, that could help people who just want to understand things before finalizing comments. And we talked about translation last April. So translating into Spanish, for example. So the letters will provide translated text that invite people to contact someone for information in Spanish. We sent letters like this last time for the first round of engagement, and a request for translation into Spanish did not come up. But we're also sending more letters this time, so we'll see what happens. And this brings me to my last set of tools and things I wanted to share. So the tools I just described are the main event for sharing the actual content, but we want to make sure the message gets out there. So there will be other ways to spread the word. We will send a second news release, and this call to action one might draw some interest. We didn't get anything picked up from the first one. And while this won't be the first e-update, the next item I have here, this will be one of the more exciting ones because it will send people to the results they've been waiting for this whole time. The city will also post something on Facebook once everything is live, and we're coordinating with our partner agencies too, so they can share our post on their Facebook accounts as well. So that would include Willamette, Lane County, and others. The county also has a summary of the project and a link to our project webpage on the city's website, and that's a permanent, more or less set of content on the county's land management division website. There will also be an announcement on the city's homepage, more like a newsroom. We have a focus on section in that newsroom where we feature recently completed work or in progress projects that invite people to take a look at what's happening. And here is something that we really got excited about and really hits on that coordinating with our partners. So for the printed announcements, we're placing a large set of weatherproof posters, given that it's January, on sandwich boards at park and trail locations throughout the study area. It seemed like a really good opportunity to get people in the moment who are near waterways and who are in the frame of mind of the natural environment while they're out experiencing the places that this project really affects. So the locations we have in mind are Doris Ranch, Clearwater Park, Rough Park, Lively Park, possibly Quartz Park, and then definitely along the Millrace area path system at the Jasper Road Trailhead, the Booth Kelly Trailhead near downtown with that newer one, and maybe a couple other spots. Willamette Lane also liked the idea of smaller flyers, same version of the poster, but smaller at some of the activity centers if they're open at that time. And the posters put out throughout town, they're going to have a QR code too. And in case people aren't familiar with what that is, I'm new to it too. This looks like a black and white square that you can scan with a phone on your camera. So those who have smartphones can go right to that project page when they're standing in front of that sign. And if that's not an option, the poster will also have a shortened link to the project page, just in case someone who still might have a phone or a camera wants to take a picture of the poster. Or if someone doesn't have a camera, they could write that little short link down if they don't have it. And these posters will be up and translated into Spanish versions as well. And since we're relying heavily on feedback where internet is accessible, we will also note that the library could be available for people who need a computer, depending on where COVID precautions bring us at that time. We'll provide the library's contact information in our announcements so people can check to make sure it's open just in case they need that computer, but also in case we may not be open. So just waiting on that to see what happens. With that, we covered what I was excited to share this evening, and I look forward to your thoughts. Thank you.
Do any committee members have questions or discussion on what Monica just presented?
I'd like to say that I think that the positioning of the posters and flyers out in the areas that people will see them is just a great idea. I hope they don't get vandalized much, but it's a real good example of outstanding outreach. I really approve of that.
I echo that. Every time I wrote something down to suggest, you mentioned it a second later, like for real, with like QR codes and having a printable survey for folks without internet and Facebook. I am just so impressed. You thought of everything, and I really hope that you share this effort, you know, on a larger stage, like OAPA or something, just to talk about what you did during this time. I really think it's above and beyond. The weatherproof posters on sandwich board on public land, I also love that. I also wanted to give kudos for the story map. I think it's a great idea because it looks like it's really intuitive, it's educational, but it also serves another purpose of being an introduction to GIS, a low barrier introduction to GIS for the general public. Often GIS can be really hard to work with, and I just think it's really fantastic to show off the data that the city has and ways that it can be used. Just really well done.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner Cuevila. My mic was delayed. I appreciate it.
I wanted to mention that I thought that web page popped. I think it was really the functionality looked great, and the ability to use multiple different buttons for the same thing I think is also really helpful, because when there's only one way to get somewhere or one way to do something, a lot of times it becomes bothersome to figure that out. The fact that there's the banner that will take you down to portions immediately, or you can go through it on your own pace, as well as just the clarity of the maps. And it seemed like it was relatively responsive too. I really liked the storyboard.
Thank you, and I will be sure to pass that on to our amazing GIS team and the consultants. That's going to really help them push through getting this out.
Any other comments from anyone before we move on?
Just totally agree. Very nice effort. It looks professional, and if it's attractive, you're going to attract more people. I think that's perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Monica.
Thanks all. I hope you enjoy the holidays as best you can. So thinking about you and sending positive thoughts.
So now we have the next agenda item is Eugene Outreach from Commissioner McGinley.
Good evening, commissioners. I'm actually going to introduce this item. So for your last meeting where we were focused on trying to use Springfield, Oregon Speaks and understand how it could work, we had Monica present, as you remember, just about the wetlands. And I also asked Commissioner McGinley if she would like to share some of the outreach tools that she had been using in her capacity as City of Eugene staff. It seemed like it might be of interest to you, given that we're also doing a code update. And so the projects that she's been working on several projects, but most recently on the middle housing approach for the City of Eugene. And so she had agreed to do that. Unfortunately, she fell ill last month. So she wasn't able to do that. But I want to just preface this in terms of this is really focused on trying to share some of the citizen outreach. We're not really here to give input to Sophie in terms of the Eugene process or policy approach. You know, this is really just an information share. If you want to talk with her about her, you know, your thoughts about the Eugene process or questions about the policy, feel free to call her as she's in her role as City of Eugene staff during regular work hours. So I mean, she's kind of in this, you know, 1 foot as being a planning commissioner and 1 foot as a city staff person tonight. So we just want to make sure we're not putting her in an awkward position for that. So has somebody made you presenter? Sophie, did you want to be presenting something?
Yes, I have a PowerPoint. I'm not yet a presenter.
Okay.
I think I can, oh no, it just tells me to ask the organizer.
So either Monica or Brenda, could you, yeah. Okay.
Oh, it's allowing me to. Okay, wonderful. I'm going to do the screen monitor too. Just bear with me. I haven't really worked from with GoToMeeting. There we go. All right. Is that full screen for everybody?
Yes.
Looks good.
Okay. Okay, and I'll turn off my camera while I'm talking. So thank you, Sandy, for having me just to share some stuff that's going on the other side of the river in my professional capacity. See if I can get my slides to advance. There we go. So for the presentation overview, I will talk about the purpose of this presentation, and then I'll really just be highlighting a couple of parts of the public involvement plan, which is our social media and web presence, and then our healthy democracy panel. The purpose tonight is to test out Springfield. Well, it was to test out Springfield, Oregon Speaks about a month ago. I haven't updated this presentation since then. Again, thank you, Sandy, and I wanted to share information. I wear 2 hats, and I wanted to clarify that this presentation is purely an information share. It's not an official City of Eugene presentation. It's pretty informal, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the City of Eugene or on behalf of the City of Springfield Planning Commission. And as Sandy mentioned, I'm not here tonight to discuss policies or requirements of House Bill 2001. Just wanted to talk about some outreach methods on the other side of the river. But happy to talk about just logistics and how things are being done as far as outreach. So I wanted to highlight a couple things. One that doesn't take a lot of staff time or funding, which is social media and the web presence, and then something that does take more staff time and funding, which is the Healthy Democracy panel. And these are just 2 parts of the entire public engagement approach. Sandy attached the public involvement plan in tonight's meeting materials, and that has the entire outline for the project, but I thought these were just 2 cool things, and I'm always happy to talk about other parts too. So this is the web page. I really like making GIFs, and so here's a GIF. The web page holds a lot of information. Here I highlighted something that shows where where middle housing can currently be built in Eugene. We also post some public meeting information on there, some fact sheets, videos. It's always changing, but that's like the base hub for where information lives. Then we have an Engage Eugene page, and that's the interactive element. That's also been updated since the screen capture was taken. It allows folks to register, ask questions, take surveys. We have an ideas board on there right now. We have a place for people to tell their stories. It's really where folks can provide input, really similar to Springfield, Oregon Speaks. Then we have a Facebook page. Part of the effort this summer with COVID and just moving mostly digital was trying to really have a comprehensive virtual approach. And so we rebranded our Facebook page. It used to be called Envision Eugene, but that was pretty project specific. So we changed it to Huge Planning. And this is where we share meeting information and videos, sometimes fun GIFs of people on Zoom. I also created an Instagram, so this didn't exist before this year. On here, there's some templates for meeting announcements. There's some interactive stories. I do Trivia Tuesdays. And I really hope that it's informative, educational, and fun while capturing a new audience. I started a few months ago, and we've gotten almost 100 new followers every month. So that's been really fun to see that grow. I also tried an Instagram takeover, and so I used the Instagram Stories feature, which is more temporary features, to partner with a national organization to share work being done and explain the work at a high level in a fun way. So then I'll move on to Healthy Democracy. So we were introduced to Healthy Democracy. They're a Portland-based nonprofit that's nonpartisan, that designs and facilitates deliberative democracy processes. The premise of their involvement with planning was that they could create a randomly selected panel representative of Eugene demographics to provide input on planning projects. They presented to the Eugene Planning Commission in a work session last December, and then we received a technical assistance grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and were able to partner with Healthy Democracy for part of the House Bill 2001 outreach. So all of this kind of came together in less than a year. So we set off once we had the funding. We sent out 7,500 mailings to randomly selected households across Eugene that invited folks to put their name in the Healthy Democracy lottery. Then over Facebook Live, Healthy Democracy selected folks using a lottery algorithm. The demographics that we were using are based on school age data in Eugene, and there's equal representation on the panel from all boards, and then there's representation from gender, age, identity, educational attainment, and experience of disability. The panel met 9 times this fall and will meet again in early 2021, 5 more times. The first phase of meetings had visiting subject matter experts, and all the meetings are live streamed and available on YouTube. They're supposed to be pretty much independent from the city. Healthy Democracy runs everything. City staff just monitors the process. But the input that we got at the end was all completely made by the Healthy Democracy panelists themselves. And lastly, the panelists are provided a stipend for their time that comes out to about $16 per hour. And this is a screen share of the review panel selection event. And here's the invitation that went out. As I mentioned, the idea was to create a panel that essentially was a microcosm of Eugene, to hear from folks all around Eugene. Since we know that there are just some folks missing from our usual public engagement processes. More information, definitely more in-depth information, can be found on the Healthy Democracy Eugene webpage. It includes a document that shows the demographics of the panel, the invitation letter shown here, the agendas for all the meetings, the information and the presentations from the visiting experts, the contract with the city, and much more. Here's a screen grab of the Facebook Live selection event. This video is available on the Healthy Democracy YouTube, where you can also find a series of videos called Discussions on Democracy that dive deep into the process. The second video of Discussions on Democracy had 2 PhD students from Carnegie Mellon that discussed algorithm making. And so if that is up your alley, go for it. It'll be a great 20 minutes. And then I can send all of these links to Sandy if anyone's interested, but mostly just wanted to hear your questions and have a very informal chat and share some stuff that we're doing over in Eugene. And I'll highlight that there's a couple external things here, which are the Healthy Democracy Eugene webpage and the Healthy Democracy YouTube, but everything else is hosted by City of Eugene. And I'm going to try to get out of here. Maybe, okay, I figured it out.
So Commissioner McGinley, thank you so much. There is a question from Commissioner Cuevila in the chat. And then, as you know, he had also submitted questions through Springfield, Oregon Speaks that I forwarded on to you before the meeting tonight. So thank you to Commissioner Cuevila for testing out our new Springfield, Oregon Speaks platform. And I'm going to follow up with you tomorrow so that we can understand better how that works and how I need to get responses back, because it's a good test. So with that little bit of introduction, Sophie, you want to take on the question he's got in the chat, and then I think there was another one in his email that I had forwarded that maybe you covered about the healthy democracy, but we can see if he has any, if that answered his question or if there's anything further.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your questions ahead of time, Commissioner Cuevila. I think I addressed what the question was, which was really what the panel is. And then I'm checking to make sure that I know the answer before I say it. So we don't have, we didn't ask about income demographics, but we do have educational attainment and then a balance of renters and homeowners. Oh, you're on mute, I'm sorry.
Was that a deliberate exclusion or was it just an omission?
I don't think it was a deliberate exclusion. There were, let me count how many demographics we used. Seven different demographic pieces of data. And that's certainly something to consider in processes. For example, some processes that Healthy Democracy has been involved with has representation of political affiliations, but since this was a city project, we didn't do that. So it kind of varies for the projects that are done, and Healthy Democracy is always happy to talk about more stuff like that too.
I just myself and any issues that have to do with housing, especially when it comes to housing equity, that it's really important to get income demographic information and to balance by that. I think that in regard to what we're doing on the code changes, that is absolutely essential information for our public outreach.
Absolutely, and there definitely are a variety of incomes that we have represented on the panel, I think just in different ways than having that specifically represented. For example, about half of the panel is renters.
Thank you for sharing, Sophie. I think it's a really interesting concept and not something I had ever thought about, the healthy democracy concept. It's interesting that it's separated from the city and it's just run by Healthy Democracy. So these people, they just meet on Healthy Democracy's platform and the information is just accessible to the city, or does the city send staff to be involved, like our staff is involved in our meetings? How does the city interact with the platform and the meetings and the members?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so Healthy Democracy usually designs citizen juries. And so we renamed it and kind of restructured the process since they hadn't worked with a city on a specific planning issue before. And so their existing structure is very legal. They have juries, experts, ex parte contact. They talk a lot about bias. And so the idea was to have no staff bias in this process. So everything is as transparent as possible. They have these big open meetings and staff is able to see those. And we're there for technical support and things like that. But then and that's the portion that's live streamed as well. And then there's some smaller breakout rooms, which are these smaller group meetings, and staff isn't watching any of those, and those also aren't live streamed. And so we really know as much as the public does. So the final work product for this first phase of their meetings was to develop a list of guiding values and principles. And we didn't see those until the public did when they were available. So it's definitely different than a process. And it's in addition to a bunch of other public outreach. And it's just very interesting. I think since it's the first time, we'll be learning a lot of lessons for how we could use it in the future and things that could be improved, and just a big learning experience. But it's been really fantastic to have different representation in the room. And just yesterday, Eugene staff met with the Eugene Planning Commission and had a couple of the panelists themselves share their insights from participation. And that's on YouTube if anybody's interested in watching. It was fascinating.
Thank you. Another question I have is, do you think that this serves as a substitute to other forms of outreach, or do you think that this serves as a supplement? So when you guys are, for instance, the city of Springfield, when we do major projects, we have, the planning commission and the council are going to be involved at some level, but we also make committees. Then we try to get specific people on those committees, like, business owners or people who have experience in, architecture, like for instance, our committees that we have for the code update. So this is on top of doing all that as another avenue, as opposed to instead of doing things like that. Am I right on that?
Absolutely. This is a supplement in addition to outreach, in addition to our tried and true toolkit and stuff that we're doing. So I can list that out a little bit. And I think another important distinction is that the Healthy Democracy is advisory to staff. And so just like any other process, the Planning Commission is going to make the recommendation and then City Council will make the final decision. So we have a bunch of groups that are advisory to staff. There is the Boards and Commissions Roundtable, the Local Partners Roundtable, the Equity Roundtable. We worked with a group of students to do under 25 outreach. And then we have the Healthy Democracy panel. And then in this next phase, we have the general public outreach, and then we're going to be meeting with all of those panels again. So there's definitely, that supplement. There's no like redesigning the public involvement process or replacing anything.
That's really cool. Thank you. Sorry, I don't want to bog you down with too many questions, but I am curious about the stipend bit. So I know that you mentioned that the company that does this is used to working with juries, and I know that juries get sort of stipend. So is that sort of the root of where that comes from? Because I know on a lot of other sorts of committees and subcommittees, you don't usually get something like that.
Right, yeah. So the idea was to limit the barriers to being involved in public processes. And so we all realize that we're planning commission, that we volunteer our time to be here on commission, and that not everybody has the ability to do that. So we wanted to incentivize folks to participate in the process and just reduce barriers. So we provided stipends, and part of that came out of the DLCD funding. Part of it came from Eugene, and then part of it came from Healthy Democracy themselves. And then we are also compensating the participants of the Equity Roundtable, just to elevate those voices and really try to reduce barriers to bringing them to the table. Another thing that Healthy Democracy provided was, because it's the time of COVID and we're not having in-person meetings, they provided some iPads or some tablets and some hotspots for folks who didn't have access to technology, and then lots of staff support to get some of that set up. So that was really amazing to get folks involved that didn't have access to internet and computer.
Thanks for that answer too. My final question is about materials. So when we come to meetings, we have big packets, and the packets have plenty of staff opinion in them. And I know that you expressed that one of the goals with this is to not have staff influencing the decisions that they're making too heavily. So, and get that independence. So how do you present them with the materials and the foundational knowledge and the questions, and make sure that those aren't leading questions, and make sure that those materials are as objective as possible? Because I value that we have some subjectivity in our materials because staff brings so much expertise. But I also know that in this instance, you guys are trying to do something different. So how do you accomplish that while still having them be informed and answering the questions?
These are all such great questions. So I just pulled up the Healthy Democracy webpage, and we did provide the panelists with a packet, kind of an intro packet, like we got as commissioners when we were onboarded. So it gives an introduction to Oregon's statewide planning program, a summary of the 19 statewide planning goals. We included the 4 fact sheets that we developed with consultants, and then a community vision map, a context study area map, and then a planning 101 presentation. Other than that, the information that the panel received was from these visiting experts, or presenters, that's what they were called. And so there was a steering committee to this process that was comprised of staff, 2 planning commissioners, a city councilor, and then some stakeholders. And we developed a menu of experts, basically, that the panel could choose from, and they summoned their own experts. And so experts would come and give these 10-minute presentations on certain topic areas. So just looking through that, we had a staff member from DLCD come in, Representative Julie Fahey visited, somebody from branch engineering visited to talk about the basics of planning, somebody from the University of Oregon, somebody from Sightline Institute, AARP, the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan Community Advisory Committee, economics consulting groups, Square One Villages, United Way. That's not even all of them, I just won't bore you. So they got to summon their own experts and kind of choose which information they brought in. And then panelists also had the ability to submit independent research. And so if they were super interested in something and decided to go down a Google path, they could submit research that could be distributed to the entire committee. And so the idea was that everybody had access to the exact same information. And then for any information that they were bringing in, it was decided to bring it in by using a consensus-based decision-making process. So lots of expert presentations on top of the background information that we gave them.
I think that's really cool, and I really appreciate you sharing this information, Sophie. I am going to have to go look and see what the product, is, and the result for the constituency, because I think that the potentials there are huge. So thank you again.
Thank you, and I'll be sure to send Sandy some links that she can distribute to everybody just for exploring. And because this is just part of Eugene's process, but if anybody ever has any questions for Healthy Democracy, they're the experts of this process.
Any other? Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Commissioner Cuevila, I know that you had some other types of questions in what you had sent through Springfield, Oregon Speaks, and Mark Rust said that he would be willing to address those, some of the more kind of policy substance issues in our own upcoming process. And Mark is on the meetings. I don't know. I'll give Mark an opportunity to say anything at this point if he wants to, but not required to. But I just wanted to say that that would be something we can address later.
Yeah, good evening, commissioners. I don't feel like I need to say anything directly at this point. I'm happy to update you on what we're doing with our process at our next check-in on the development code update. So unless you have any questions for me, I don't have anything.
I'm fine with waiting for response.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone have any other questions for Sophie? Thank you again, Sophie. Really appreciate the information.
Yeah, thank you.
So I believe that's the last of our agenda items. So now we have reports of city council meetings. I'll go first, I suppose. This one's pretty easy. I went to I think it was the November 23rd meeting that I was assigned, and coincidentally, that was the meeting that I interviewed with council for a reappointment. So it went well, and I'll be with you for another 4 years, I'm happy to say. And we're also going to have a new incoming planning commissioner. I believe his name is Matthew Salazar. So that's going to be exciting, and I'm looking forward to working with him for the next 4 years. But that's pretty much it. There were a handful of interviews and a lot of deliberation, a lot of good interviews, not just from Matt, myself, but just from everyone that applied. So I'm glad that there was a lot of interest. I believe there were 9 applications, plus or minus a little bit, but I remember back when I applied the first time, not nearly as much interest in public involvement at that time. And the fact that we're dealing with COVID-19 and everybody's, so somewhat busy and probably not thinking as much, how do I get to City Hall to do more? I was really pleasantly surprised to see so many people interested. So that's my report on that. Do we have other reports of council meetings? I know that we're missing multiple commissioners, so I won't be surprised if we don't, and they can give them at later meetings.
I attended last night's Springfield Economic Development Association meeting, and I'd like to hand it off to our esteemed colleague on the Springfield City Council, Councilor Storr, to explain what happened there.
Thanks, Mike. I wasn't really expecting to report, but I'd be happy to. The council has approved the purchase of the memorial building at 799 A Street. And we are very, very happy to be adding that to the assets of the city. It's a building with some history. Councilor Moe spoke of some of the history of the building, and we thought that no matter where it ends up or what it winds up being used for or whose hands it ends up in, we should have a plaque to commemorate some of the past of this building. We are also hoping, and I hope I'm not alone in this, to use it as an egg and warming center for this winter. It was used for that purpose last winter and served the purpose perfectly. So we're very happy about the acquisition, and thanks for the opportunity to report.
Thank you, Councilor, and thank you, Mike. Any other reports? Hearing none, do we have business from members of the committee? Hearing none, do we have business from members of the Development and Public Works Department?
Yes, we have 2 items to share with you tonight, and I'm going to ask our Assistant City Attorney, Christina Kras, to report to you on the status of one of your land use decisions that you made a year and a half ago, maybe, or it's been at least a year.
A little over a year, I think, probably close to a year and a half at this point. So yeah, you'll recall in 2019 that city staff had approved tentative site plan, hillside development overlay permit, and tree felling permit for several tax lots in Glenwood for subs construction of a new substation and transmission line. Those were then appealed to the Planning Commission and hearings official jointly because the properties overlapped city limits. Those decisions that you made and that the hearings official made were then appealed to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals by Royal Blue Organics, who was the same party that appealed the staff decisions to you and the hearings official. LUBA held oral arguments back in June, and then we waited about 5 months for a decision, which is a long time to wait for LUBA. We were set over every 2 weeks for a long period of time, and then the fires happened, and then they just stopped getting back to us until coincidentally the 2 days I was out of the office in November, which I kind of expected that was when we would finally get the decision. So that was published on November 12th. If you go to the Land Use Board of Appeals website and look for their opinions, you can find it in their opinions from 2020. It's labeled with Royal Blue Organics versus City of Springfield. I can also send that out later to the commission if you'd like to read it. Subsequently, both Sub and Royal Blue Organics appealed LUBA's decision to the Oregon Court of Appeals, and so it's not going to come back to you anytime soon, but I will still summarize for you what LUBA held because that may inform what the Court of Appeals can do. So I think you'll remember that one of the main issues in the appeal in front of you and the hearings official was whether the high voltage transmission line being located where it was consistent with the Public Facilities and Services Plan, and whether it was allowed in the zoning, specifically outside city limits in the Glenwood Employment Mixed Use Zone, which was also subject to the Urban Fringe Overlay. Those were key issues, I think, for the city to prevail on, because if we don't win on those issues, it requires a lot of legislative work likely to fix that problem so that the substation and transmission line could be built the way Sub proposed. LUBA sided with the city and with you and the hearings official on those findings and held that the PFSP requires a general location to be shown only, and that the alignment that was shown by Sub was consistent with that general location. They also agreed with the hearings officials findings on the use, and Jim Donovan had subsequently issued a director's interpretation of the appropriate zoning that was appealed as part of this package that was appealed to Land Use Board of Appeals, and they upheld that staff decision entirely. There were a number of issues related to evidence and specific findings. You'll remember there was a lot of discussion around grading and the evidence around how much detail Sub provided in their grading plans and the slope stability and those types of claims. LUBA found deficiencies in some of those types of findings. And so that was remanded back to the hearings official and planning commission in your own jurisdictional areas separately. And so the process on remand, if or when that comes back, will be to hold other public hearings or reopen the record and allow Sub to submit more evidence. The last main issue that was not one I was expecting for LUBA to go this direction, but they concluded, based on, I think, some findings that just weren't written as clearly as staff could have written them, that the wetlands that are shown and labeled as wetlands on the city's water quality limited watercourse map are water quality limited watercourses themselves and are subject to a 50-foot setback requirement in the code. That is not how the city has interpreted or applied that map in its history. The way that that map has been interpreted and applied is that only those water courses that are labeled as a water quality limited water course on the map are considered water quality limited water courses. And there are other water bodies, for example, the local wetlands inventory, that are shown on the map largely for reference purposes, but are not a regulatory part of the map for setback purposes in the code. That wasn't articulated as clearly as it could have been in the findings. And so LUBA looked instead to some definitions in the code that are, broadly define a water course, and then concluded that because wetlands were on the map, that they're subject to a 50-foot setback. So as staff, as assistant city attorney and then subs legal counsel, we're looking at ways that we can correct that interpretation, because that could have potentially large implications for the city in the future. We have not treated not locally significant wetlands in Springfield as subject to large setback requirements, assuming that a developer gets all state and federal required permits. And so if this interpretation stood, it could have implications for your other decisions that could come in front of the Planning Commission or staff regarding not locally significant wetlands in other places. Marcola Meadows is one example, for instance. So we are looking at interpretation options there, that if sub files an application for formal interpretation, for example, that would come to you as the Planning Commission as the decision-making authority on that question. But in the meantime, otherwise, we're just waiting for the Court of Appeals to either uphold the decision, LUBA's decision entirely, or modify it. They could send it back to LUBA to change their opinion on some pieces of it. And then I would update you again if it's coming back to you, especially on remand. Any questions?
So Andy has put in the chat that he would like, Commissioner Landon, that he would like to see that decision. So we can send that out to you all by email.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that tomorrow.
Thank you for the update, Christina. I'm not hearing any questions. So is that all we have from staff?
Now, I wanted to report back to you on Springfield, Oregon Speaks. You had asked some questions at your last meeting, and so I have some answers. So one question was, within the platform, how long does the information stay? And the answer is forever, unless we decide to take it down. So each meeting goes into the archives there, and you can go back and look at those past meeting archives, and everything that we have put there will stay there as long as we want it to be there. Second question, Commissioner Sherwood, you had asked, is there a way that we can link a topic from one meeting to the next? We discussed that with the staff at People Speak, and we decided that for the longer term projects like the Wetland and Riparian Inventory, for example, that it probably would work best to have the project webpage have the list of different meetings when that had come to the Planning Commission or the council or other committee groups. That's what we do now. We'll have links to those packets. And we'll start including links to the Springfield, Oregon Speaks platform with that meeting date so people can know where to go. But to have them linked within the platform for something that might not come back for another 6 months is a little bit problematic for that. But within that item, we would have the link to the project webpage, and therefore you could find the information that way. For land use decisions that might be carried over like a continuation of a hearing, then that would be a more direct linkage that would be shown whether this had been carried over or continued or what was done with that on the shorter term. And then the third question was about voting. whether there's any option for pre-voting. Well, that turns out I had been misinterpreting that. So there is within the administrative side of things a way to track votes, but that's actually to make the minutes taking easier. It's an administrative function. There's not a way in Springfield, Oregon Speaks for the commissioners to actually vote. So you will still continue to do your regular voice voting and motions and all like you normally do. There's no button to push. That's just a way for us to record. So that was my misunderstanding of that feature. So those are the 3 questions and answers that I had from last time. Any follow-up on any of that?
First off, thank you, Sandy, for getting the answers. For the linking thing, what you're saying, I think that sounds, you know, like it's plenty. I was really just curious about the capabilities when I was asking. As for the voting, that wasn't specifically my question, but I think that it's probably safer to just continue traditional voice voting and not to be clicking votes, regardless of whether we were able to. Although I think it, you know, it sounded cool. But I'm not too brokenhearted about that. Other commissioners?
I think that the regarding the showing links from one hearing to a next, I think that, you know, the web page idea I think is pretty good. But I also think since we have these text documents that we have that actually have links in them, that, you know, we could actually put, you know, just HTML links in there for, say, you know, thinking of projects that carried over and over and over, like, say, the Patrician Park one that, you know, one of the headers in the thing could be, you know, these were the 3 previous meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, and we can try to do that. One of the challenges that we have is that if you include links, that becomes part of the record. So as long as it's already in the record, that's fine. But when we start linking things, we just have to keep in mind that we have to capture that. Like if we're linking to a web page, that we capture that web page as it is at that point. But that is certainly a good navigation tool. Any other comments or discussion about Springfield, Oregon Speaks and how it's working or not? I mean, you know, we've been sort of testing it out for the past several months with the hope that it would mainly broaden out the options for people to comment. And of course, we haven't gotten a lot of comment or really even had a public hearing yet. But you will in January on the Marcola Meadows master plan. So we want to make sure that it's, you know, we've kind of got the kinks worked out, and I'm going to follow up with Commissioner Quavel a little bit to make sure I understand how that's working. So any concerns or questions at this point on that platform? So as a reminder, if we do have public commenting through that platform, they will, which I don't know, we didn't get a lot of comments from on the plan amendment zone change, but I don't know if we will for the master plan. But those will come in potentially through Springfield, Oregon Speaks, and then you'll be able to log in to look at those, and then the public will see whether you've seen them or not. And Brenda and I are going to be speaking with Andy tomorrow, and we'll probably try to get the information up onto Springfield, Oregon Speaks, at least the application, if not the full staff report earlier, so that people can go there and look at it. And then the staff report would be available a week before the actual hearing. So something to think about, that you could always check that even if you don't have an email, there might be something posted in the future.
Thank you again, Sandy, for everything you're doing on that and everybody else involved in that process. I'm really, really excited to see this thing in action once we have, you know, meetings with more public interest. I think that it's really good that we're going to come in prepared with that. But I also think that we're going to see the true potential of the platform when we have some meetings like that coming into the next year. So thank you again, and I'm just looking forward to it. If no other commissioners have comments or questions about Springfield Oregon Speaks, I believe that we're done with the staff section, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, in that case, I believe that we're adjourned. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful next few weeks and holidays. Be safe and look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Dan, do you want to stay on for a second?
You can stop recording.